What kind of father blocks his crying daughter's face with $1 billion contract on the anniversary of her mother's death? At table 4, a man held a contract at eye level. 47 pages, wire-bound, corners still sharp from the printer. Derek Voss held it the way a man holds a newspaper on a crowded train, not reading, shielding. His phone was pressed to his ear. Tell Singapore the terms don't move. If Park wants out of the clause, he can present a counter before Thursday. Not Friday, Thursday. On the chair beside him, a small, gray, stuffed bear. One eye was a mismatched button. The seam along the left arm had started to give. The chair across from Derek held a 6-year-old girl who was trying very hard not to make noise. Her name was Sophie. Her shoulders had pulled inward over the last 20 minutes. Her chin was down, the back of her wrist pressed against her mouth. Today was the anniversary of her mother's death. Derek did not look up. Sophie's eyes filled. She pressed her wrist harder. Her whole face was the concentrated effort of a child who has learned that certain sounds make things worse. The effort was immense, and eventually, because she was 6, and because the body keeps its own accounting, it stopped working. Eat, Derek said, without lowering the contract. Sophie's breath caught on an audible hitch, the kind of sound a mother hears from 2 rooms away. Derek repositioned the contract. The couple at the adjacent table, the woman in a sage green silk blouse, exchanged the wordless look of people who have witnessed something they cannot name. Sophie's body made the decision her willpower couldn't. She lurched forward, and what had been tears became something else entirely. Her dinner, what little she'd eaten of it, onto the tablecloth, the chair arm, the floor beneath her small shoes. She looked up at her father. The expression on her face was not sickness. It was horror. The specific horror of a child who has made a mess in a place where messes do not happen, in front of a father who is already somewhere else. The manager appeared immediately. His name was Preston. He wore his authority the way some men wear too much cologne. Sir, our policy on incidents of this nature, a sanitation fee of $200 added to the bill, will require the table vacated in the next 30 seconds. Sophie sat in her ruined chair, the stuffed bear pressed to her chest, her face the gray-white of a child past crying, past asking for anything. Tessa Lang had been watching since the shoulders started to curve inward. She'd been at table 14 with a water pitcher. She noticed the child's spine, the bear's button eye aimed at the floor. She moved to 15 and kept noticing, the way you keep hearing a sound in the wall that no one else registers. When Preston finished his 30-second speech, Tessa was already moving. Not running. Running would have put a spotlight on Sophie. She walked with the controlled purpose that makes people assume you're going somewhere authorized. She crouched beside Sophie's chair, clean service cloth from her apron. She worked the chair arm, then the floor, outward from the child, without comment, without the involuntary wince the couple nearby hadn't managed to suppress. Then she took a dampened napkin and pressed it gently against Sophie's chin. Sophie flinched. Tessa waited. 1 breath, 2, and Sophie went still. They were level now, the same height, the same world. Tessa looked straight into Sophie's eyes and whispered, "She only needs a mom." Then she reached up into her own hair and unclipped a small plastic clip, pale yellow, the kind sold 12 to a pack at the drugstore. She placed it carefully in Sophie's open palm. Keep this. It's a secret key. When you hold it, Mom will hear you. Sophie looked down at the clip. Her fingers closed around it. Not fast. Slowly. The way a hand closes around something it intends not to lose. The gray white began to leave her face. Her breath steadied. One shuddering exhale, then smaller, then something closer to even. She pulled the stuffed bear tighter against her chest. And then, so faint it might have been the light shifting, the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The thing that comes just before the face remembers how. The first time, in 3 years, that Sophie Voss's face had moved in that direction at all. Tessa stood. Derek Voss was looking at her, the contract in his lap, phone somewhere. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't classify. Not gratitude, not guilt, something more deliberate than either. "This isn't the first time I've seen you," he said. Tessa held his gaze for 1 second. Then she picked up the damp cloth and walked back toward the service corridor. The back of her neck held the weight of his words the whole way there. What she didn't know was that Derek Voss had been watching her for weeks, not from across a restaurant, much closer than that. And what he'd seen would change everything she thought she understood about tonight. The service corridor smelled like industrial dish soap and the particular fatigue of people who have been pleasant for 6 hours straight. Tessa pressed her back against the wall. Preston was waiting. "You want to explain what that was?" "I cleaned a table. You inserted yourself into a VIP situation without authorization. You made physical contact with a guest's child." He tapped his screen. "The sanitation fee is being charged to your account. $200, deducted from your final paycheck. And if you step out of role again, that evaluation ends tonight." Through the swinging door came the dining room. Glasses, low voices, a chair scraping. Normal, as though nothing had happened 40 feet away. "She was sick," Tessa said. "She was the responsibility of her father and our liability protocol, not yours. Back on the floor." He left. Tessa stood in the corridor for 10 seconds. Then Table 9 got their check. The man at Table 7 had been watching her since her 3rd pass. When she reached across to fill his water glass, he shifted his elbow. Slow, deliberate. The burgundy went sideways, a cascade across the tablecloth, soaking down onto her apron and across her shoes. He looked at her and smiled. The smile of a man who wanted to see what she would do when she had no choice but to kneel. She looked at him for 1 full second, not the service 1,000-yard stare, something more direct. He shifted in his chair. She picked up the bottle, set it upright, and went for clean linens. She was on her hands and knees blotting the floor, in front of everyone, which was the point, which was exactly what he'd wanted, when the child at the table behind her started crying. A toddler in a high chair, suddenly inconsolable. The parents looked stricken. Tessa didn't make a decision. She turned on her knees, made a sound, low, rhythmic, not quite a hum, held eye contact with the toddler, moved one finger in a slow arc. The child blinked. The crying dropped a register, then another. Tessa stood, straightened her apron, and returned to the burgundy. A composition notebook, black and white marbled covers. She'd filled 2 of them that year. Lesson observations, things children said when they thought adults weren't listening. Her advisor had told her she had a gift for this work. Not the kind you teach, the kind you either have or you don't. Her grandmother had started forgetting things before the program ended. First the stove, then appointments. Then, on a Tuesday in October, her grandmother had stood in the kitchen doorway and asked Tessa, in a perfectly calm voice, who she was. Tessa had withdrawn from the program the following Monday. A family she'd known through the program offered her a nanny position that spring. She'd said no. She didn't want to play the role of mother, to stand in for something she wasn't, in a family that wasn't hers, performing an intimacy that was real for the child and temporary for her. She had limits. That was one of them. Standing in the corridor now, apron stained with someone else's wine, watching her own instincts move through her body without her permission, she thought about that limit. It seemed to have moved. She was going to go home. She was going to file this night under the category of nights that do not deserve to be remembered. Except that was not what happened next. The suspension came at 10:23 p.m. Suspended pending review. Your final month's paycheck is being withheld to cover sanitation costs, damage to the chair upholstery, and administrative processing. Items left in the staff room should be collected tonight. Tessa picked up her coat from the hook. 3 years at Ardent. 1 coat hook and half a locker shelf. She pushed through the side door. Seattle in October. Salt and cold and the far-off sound of water. The street was wet and orange under the lamps. Her phone rang. The voice was thin, careful, working against something. Tessa, I'm running low. The white ones. The white ones. $400 a month. The pharmacy on Westlake that closed at 11. It was 10:26 p.m. She had no paycheck coming, $43 in her account, a suspended job, and a grandmother who needed medication in the next 34 minutes. I'm on my way, she said. I'm coming. She was calculating. Which bus, whether there was time, whether $43 would. Miss Lang? A man at the corner. Dark coat, neutral expression, the contained posture of someone accustomed to waiting without being noticed. Marcus. He held a car door open. Mr. Voss would like to speak with you. Tessa looked at her phone, then the car door, then her watch. She got in. 31st floor. A real desk. Wood. Scarred. Years of actual work. A photograph on the corner. A woman laughing. And Sophie, smaller, both of them looking at something outside the frame. Derek Voss stood at the window, watching the sound. Dark, moving. The lights of West Seattle fractured across the water. Then he turned. Here at 10:30 at night, he was something more legible than the man behind the contract. He was tired, not the performed kind, the structural kind. The kind that changes posture. Sit down, please. He stayed standing, the habit of a man who runs meetings and no longer notices. Sophie. He placed the name between them. She hasn't slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 3 months. Doesn't eat unless someone sits with her. 4 placements in 2 years. Qualified, vetted, expensive. She stops speaking when they're present, entirely, for days. He moved toward the desk. Tonight was the first time in 11 months I've seen her reach toward someone she didn't already know. I don't need a nanny. I need someone my daughter won't reject. Tessa looked at the photograph. The laughing woman. Sophie at 4. A garden in some other life. Her phone had 6% battery. The pharmacy closed at 11. I've worked with children. No formal caregiving credentials. Sophie doesn't evaluate credentials. Tonight she held your hair clip for 40 minutes and fell asleep in the car with it in her hand. Tessa looked at the phone in her lap. 6%. $43. The thin voice on the other end of the last call. This had started as a choice. She could feel it shifting. quietly, without drama, into something that was no longer a choice in the conventional sense, not an opportunity, the only door in front of her. She was not naive enough to pretend otherwise. "I won't perform things I don't feel," she said. "I won't play a character." Derek nodded once. "I know. That's why I'm asking you." Tessa looked at him. Then she said, "Okay." She told herself she was making a decision that night. She would understand later that the decision had already been made by someone who had been paying attention for much longer than she knew. The bedroom was across the hall from Sophie's. Beige walls, white duvet, a view of the garden, bare-branched and wet, assembled to be acceptable to anyone and memorable to no one. Sophie kept her distance that first day, brief answers, eyes that slid away. That night, Tessa woke to a thin light under Sophie's door. Sophie was sitting upright in bed, both arms locked around the stuffed bear, eyes open and fixed on the middle of the room. Not crying, past crying, into the quieter, more frightening place where tears have run out and the fear hasn't. Tessa sat down on the floor in the doorway. She didn't cross into the room, didn't reach for Sophie, didn't say, "It's okay." Any of the sentences children have learned not to believe. She looked at her own hands. "My grandmother taught me something when I was scared at night." No response. "You hold up your hand." Tessa held hers up, fingers spread. "And you count stars. Not real ones, imaginary ones. One for each finger." She touched her thumb. "This one's been burning for 1 billion years. It's not going anywhere." Her index finger. "This one's small, but it's the brightest. Go figure." A shift. Sophie's breathing changed, not calmer yet, just different. "You don't have to. I'm just going to sit here for a while." 17 seconds. Then Sophie raised her hand. Slowly, in the dark, her small fingers spread open. "That one." Just above a whisper. "Is that the biggest?" "Completely up to you. It's your sky." "Mine's blue, like before it's really night, when the sky can't decide." "That's the best blue there is." Sophie came back into her body by degrees. First her shoulders, then the grip on the bear. She reached out and took Tessa's hand. Not urgently, deliberately. From the hallway, the soft shift of weight on floorboards. Derek. He stayed. He did not speak. After a long moment, the floorboard shifted again, retreating. Later, when Sophie was asleep, the footsteps stopped outside the door one more time. "Don't cross emotional boundaries." She didn't answer. "Please don't go." Sophie said it at the edge of sleep. Her grip became specific. Tessa did not move. The sky above Sophie's hand filled up, star by star. And soon, Derek would show Tessa something that would flip her understanding of everything that had happened since that first night at Ardent. Wednesday morning, 10 days in. Derek asked her to come to his office at 8. 2 cups of coffee on the side table. He opened his laptop. "I want to show you something." Security camera footage. Ardent. Different angles, different nights, time-stamped. First clip. 3 weeks before Sophie's episode. A toddler in a high chair, mid-meltdown. Tessa passing, pausing, crouching. The slow arc of one finger. The toddler stilling. Second clip. After 2 in the morning, Tessa leaving a late shift. A man asleep against the building wall. She stopped, looked in her bag, placed a half-wrapped portion of bread beside him without waking him, and walked on. She watched herself do this. like looking at a photograph she didn't remember being taken. There are others, but I think you understand the point. He leaned back, the focused attention of a man who has learned to distinguish between what is performed and what is structural. I didn't just review the camera footage. I came to the restaurant myself, more than once, different nights, just to watch what you did when you believed no one was looking. Tessa placed her coffee cup on the coaster, in the exact center. You came, she said, 3 times. Once on a shift you didn't know was your last. You covered a section for a colleague who was sick in the back. The table never knew. You just did it. She looked at the frozen image on his laptop. Herself on the pavement, placing bread beside a sleeping man. She did not remember deciding to do that. She had just done it. She had believed, crouching on that restaurant floor, that she was invisible. None of that had been what she thought. The door pushed open. Sophie came in, still in her school coat, backpack on, straight from the door. She wrapped both arms around Tessa from the side, face pressed against her sleeve. Daddy said you're like a real mom. Into the sweater, like something she had been waiting to say out loud and had finally found the right room for it. Tessa looked at Derek. He looked at Sophie. He didn't correct her. Not the compliment. The selection. She had thought, crouching on that restaurant floor, that being invisible was the whole story. She was starting to understand it had never been. But what she couldn't know, 60 hours away, would make her wonder if being chosen was enough, or if it would become the thing that destroyed her. The story broke on a Thursday. Celebrity gossip site first, then 2 regional aggregators, then by noon, a national feed. Tech billionaire Derek Voss hires Waitress to play mom to grieving daughter. Sophie was at school. Tessa read 3 versions and put her phone face down on the counter. The black car arrived Friday afternoon. Constance Lee Hargrove, sister of Sophie's mother, arrived without announcing herself. Pearl earrings, hardened warmth. She kissed Derek on both cheeks and looked at Tessa the way a person looks at a glass, left where glasses don't belong. You must be the one from the restaurant. Tessa. Of course. Behind her, Vivian. Mid-30s, blazer, folder under one arm, master's in early childhood psychology, 3 former heads of state's children, board certified, fully vetted, available. Vivian crouched at Sophie's level with the smooth motion of someone who has done it professionally many times. She brought a gift. White box, gold ribbon. Inside was an expensive, gold-plated teddy bear, polished, beautiful, and completely untouched by love. Sophie looked at it, then tucked the old bear, gray, button-eyed, mismatched thread along the seam, tighter under her arm, and placed the new one back in its box with both hands. Vivian extended an arm toward Sophie. Sophie took a step back. Constance reset her expression. Sophie deserves consistency, stability, a professional with a documented methodology. She looked toward Tessa with a smile that had nothing behind it. People like her don't raise heirs, Derek. They serve them. Tessa stood against the wall, watching Sophie, who was looking at the gold bear in the box, then the old bear in her arm, the pressure in the room landing on her face in real time. The wavering was visible, the slow confusion of a child being told, without words, that what she feels might be wrong. The knock came 30 minutes in. Preston stepped inside. Pressed shirt, controlled posture. He glanced at Constance before he looked at Derek. I've worked alongside this woman for 2 years. I observed her that night. She positioned herself. She used that child to gain proximity to this family. It wasn't compassion. It was a strategy. "That's not true," Tessa said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. She was warned twice. She disregarded both warnings. "This is a pattern. Stop." Once. Clear. Preston's fabricated testimony hung in the room like smoke. Sophie had been on the stairs throughout, processing not argument but atmosphere, the temperature of rooms, the things that pass between people without being said. Later, she would learn this from Marcus. Sophie crept into Derek's office while Constance and Vivian had tea. She heard him on a call. The arrangement, the structure of it, the compensation. She heard it the way a child hears things, without the frame adults build around money to make it mean less than it does. She came out with the yellow clip in her fist. She stood in the hallway and looked at Tessa. Sophie's eyes went to the clip in her hand. They filled. Then she looked up, tears already falling, and threw the clip to the floor. Mom would never need to be paid. She climbed the stairs. Tessa stood in the hallway. The clip lay on the floor between them. Am I stealing her mother's place? The thought arrived without words, just cold somewhere under the ribs. She put her hand flat on the wall to steady herself. The star counting, the hand holding, the sitting on doorway floors at 2 a.m. She had not named any of it. She had just shown up. And now Sophie was upstairs, the clip was on the floor, and no one was coming into the hallway. She went upstairs, packed her bag quietly, and left through the side door. Seattle rain. Not dramatic, persistent. Already soaked into everything by the time you notice it. She believed she had never fully belonged inside that house. She believed it completely. She was wrong. She was wrong about all of it. And in 48 hours, the man she thought had let her go was about to walk into a room full of cameras and trade a billion-dollar deal to say her name. The press conference had been called for the Mercer merger announcement. 200 seats, 6 networks, 18 months of development. The room was full of people ready to watch the talking points delivered. Tessa was at a coffee shop 12 blocks away. $41. Job listings on her phone. A half-finished tea gone cold. Marcus had texted her the address at 6 a.m. No explanation. She stood at the back of the room. Derek stood at the podium. His communications director stood 3 feet left with an expression that did not quite conceal the alarm underneath. Derek looked at the cameras. The Mercer partnership is off the table. The financial journalist in the front row, recorder in hand, lowered it slowly. Someone's pen hit the floor and was not picked up. I failed as a father. The flat delivery of a man stating a fact he has been keeping at a distance and has now decided to stop moving away from. The communications director had stopped moving. The woman you've been reading about, she cleaned a floor on her hands and knees, in a room full of people who saw her as furniture, and cared for my daughter without being asked, without being thanked, without a single person registering what they were watching. When I was told she was calculating, the cameras were already running. I had already watched everything. The sequence was reversed. She chose my daughter long before I chose her. Constance sat in the 3rd row, very still, waiting for the room to shift back in her direction. The room did not shift back. The testimony offered against her was fabricated. Our legal team has documented the discrepancy. We'll be proceeding accordingly. He paused. Constance, your petition for guardianship of Sophie has been reviewed by our family attorney and will be formally declined. He looked toward the back of the room. Found her, in the way of someone who already knows exactly where to look. She stayed, he said, when she had every reason to leave. He walked off the stage. His communications director said something into his ear. He heard it and kept walking. Tessa had already turned. The hand that caught her was small. Sophie, pale blue dress, 2 braids, frosting still on her wrist from breakfast, hit her at the waist with both arms and held on. "Mom!" into Tessa's ribs. "Please don't go." Sophie's arms were locked, and neither of them moved. Tessa's hand came up and rested on the back of Sophie's head. Derek was beside her. He shrugged off his jacket, looked down at her feet. She was standing barefoot on the cold floor, her shoes lost somewhere in the crowd. He crouched and laid the jacket flat on the ground in front of her, so she had something to stand on instead of nothing. He looked up at her from that position. Crouched on the floor, jacket spread beneath her feet, cameras rolling behind him. "I failed as a father, but she didn't." He stood, faced the room. "There are no VIPs when it comes to my daughter." A beat. "She is not my employee. She is my family." Sophie had not let go. Both arms around Tessa's waist, face pressed against her, while the room moved around them. Tessa held her. There are moments when everything you believed about your place in the world goes quiet, and something true and irreversible takes its place. This was one. And what came 6 months later, you'll want to stay for that. 6 months later, on a Saturday in March, the restaurant at the corner of First and Seneca reopened. Same building, same view of the Sound. But what you noticed first, walking in, was what was gone. The velvet rope, the reserved signage, the cordoned corner where tables had cost twice as much for the same light and the same water. The VIP section had been physically removed. Every seat in the room had an equal claim on the afternoon sun. In the far corner, a shelf of 30 or 40 books, spines worn and various. Below it, 3 small chairs, a yellow and cream rug, a basket of crayons. A hand-lettered sign on the wall. The reading corner, named by Sophie Voss, age 6. Free for any child who wanted it. Sophie had requested a specific list for her birthday. Derek had followed it exactly. Friends from school, Marcus and his 9-year-old daughter, the woman from table 9, whose toddler Tessa had calmed on a night that now felt like another century, and a man who arrived with a small bunch of yellow daisies from the market he passed on his walk from work. He had been sleeping against the wall of Ardent on the night the cameras were running. Derek had offered him a position 3 months ago. He'd said yes. He set the daisies near Sophie's cake. She examined them with gravity. "Yellow," she said. "Yellow," he agreed. She arranged them in a glass of water herself. The cake had been Sophie's idea too. Lemon, because Tessa had once mentioned, in passing, on an unremarkable Tuesday morning while they were making lunches, that lemon cake was the one thing her grandmother made from scratch every year without fail. Sophie had filed this away without comment. 3 weeks later, she'd handed Derek a torn piece of notebook paper with lemon cake, Tessa's grandma's kind, written in the careful print of a child who has decided something is important. Derek had called 4 bakeries before he found one that understood what "from scratch" actually meant. The cake sat in the center of the long table now, lemon yellow frosting, 7 candles for Sophie, and 1 extra that Sophie had insisted on. For people who should be here but aren't. And nobody had questioned it. The unlit candle stood a little apart from the others, and when Sophie had placed it there herself that morning, she'd done it with a steadiness that was not sadness exactly, something older than sadness. The particular grace of a child who has learned to hold two things at once. Tessa had watched her do it from across the kitchen and not said a word. Some moments don't need words. Some moments need only a person present enough to witness them. Tessa was at the reading corner. A warm-up story first. A small one about a rabbit who keeps misplacing the same scarf. 6 children on the rug. Most of them not Sophie's invited guests. They had simply migrated over because the voice reading made whatever was happening there feel like it was happening specifically for you. The woman from table 9 sat in a chair just outside the rug's edge, her toddler, bigger now, steadier on his feet, wedged between her knees, listening with his whole body leaned forward. She caught Tessa's eye once, mid-page. Didn't say anything. Just nodded, the small, deliberate nod of someone acknowledging a debt they know can't be repaid in any conventional way. Tessa turned the page. Sophie stood at the edge of the rug, frosting on her wrist, not bothered. Watching Tessa the way people watch things they are trying to memorize, the way you look at something when some part of you already knows you will want to remember this exact moment, this exact light, this exact version of a person you love. Marcus leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed, watching Sophie watch Tessa. He said nothing. He'd known Derek for 11 years and had never once seen Sophie stand that still for that long, unless she was asleep. He pulled out his phone and took a photograph. He would send it to Derek later that night with no caption. Derek would set it as his lock screen without replying. Tessa finished the page and looked up, found Sophie's eyes immediately. The particular frequency she'd been calibrated to since a night in a doorway months ago. Sophie walked across the rug. She was holding the old bear, gray, button-eyed, seam repaired in mismatched thread, out in front of her in both hands. She placed it into Tessa's hands. Tessa held it against her chest, bear facing out, the way Sophie always carried it. Sophie watched her do this. Her chin lifted slightly. The posture of a child who has made a decision and is watching to see if the world will honor it. "Okay," she said, solemn, like a contract entered into before witnesses. "Okay," Tessa said. Derek had been standing at the edge of the reading corner for longer than he'd admitted to himself. He'd come over, intending to signal that the cake was ready. He'd stopped when he saw Sophie cross the rug with the bear. He'd watched the whole exchange with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who has spent 3 years being very competent at a great number of things and has only recently begun to understand which things actually matter. He was wearing the green sweater, the one Tessa had pointed to in a store window 4 months ago and said simply, "That one." He bought it that afternoon. He wore it now without thinking about it, which was, she understood, the whole point. Sophie's frosting was on his sleeve from an earlier ambush hug. A full-speed collision somewhere between the kitchen and the gift table. Sophie with her arms up, Derek catching her without breaking stride. The practiced ease of a man who has learned, finally, to expect to be needed. He crouched down, right there on the restaurant floor, in front of Sophie and Marcus and the woman from table 9 and the man with the yellow daisies and 6 children on a rug. No box, no ribbon. A ring held between his thumb and forefinger. A band with a small blue stone. The particular blue of sky before it decides to be night. He didn't make a speech. He wasn't a man who made speeches about the things that mattered most. Tessa had learned this and had come to understand it as its own kind of language. The absence of performance was the performance. the crouching on the floor instead of the grand gesture, the jacket laid on cold ground, the green sweater, the lemon cake. Sophie pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes went very wide and very bright, and she looked at Tessa with an expression that contained, somehow, both the 6-year-old who had sat upright in the dark counting imaginary stars and the person she was already becoming. Derek looked up at Tessa. She helped me pick it. Tessa looked at Sophie. Sophie's dignity lasted 4 seconds. Then she dropped her hands from her mouth and said at full volume, with the absolute authority of someone who has been waiting for this moment and has opinions about how long it is taking. "It's the sky color, Mom. Say yes." One of the children on the rug whispered something to another. The man with the yellow daisies looked at his shoes and smiled. Marcus uncrossed his arms. Tessa put her hand in Derek's. Later, when the cake was finished and the story told and the children dispersed and the restaurant held only the quiet of a room that has contained something good, Sophie fell asleep in a reading corner chair, the old bear tucked under her chin, her party dress slightly wrinkled, one braid half undone, her mouth soft and open the way children's mouths go in real sleep. The sleep that arrives suddenly, without negotiation, after a day that has used up every last thing. Tessa sat beside her and did not move for a long time. She watched Sophie's chest rise and fall, the small hand resting open on the armrest, the particular stillness of a child who, for the first time in a long time, does not need to hold on to anything to feel safe. The sound was dark and moving through the glass. The same city that had watched her carry other people's things and clean other people's floors and press her back against corridor walls on nights too heavy to stand up straight through. Those lights were still there, and she was not the same person sitting inside them. She looked at the ring on her hand. She thought about the night she unclipped the yellow clip from her own hair. She had thought she was giving something small away, the kind of object that gets lost in a jacket pocket and is only missed when you reach in and find it gone. A 12-pack at the drugstore thing, pale yellow, plastic, worth nothing. She had not known it was a key. She had not known, placing it in a small, cold hand in a ruined restaurant, that she was also placing herself, her history, her grandmother's star-counting trick, her composition notebooks, her limits and the ways they moved, every unremarkable Tuesday morning she would ever spend making lunches and mentioning in passing that lemon cake was the thing her grandmother made from scratch, into something that would hold all of it. Derek came and sat in the chair on the other side of Sophie, not close enough to wake her, just present, the way he'd learned to be present, quietly, without requiring anything in return. The three of them stayed like that for a while, the restaurant around them empty and warm, the sound outside still moving. Outside, the sound was still moving. The lights were the same lights, and in Sophie's arms the old bear held its place, worn, repaired, chosen, the way all the best things are. If someone has ever really seen you when you were sure you were invisible, then you already know what Tessa felt in that room. And if you've ever given something small away without expecting anything back, then you've already understood the whole story. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the smallest kindnesses have the longest reach. We'll be back soon with another story that begins exactly where you least expect it. Stay with us.